2021 special meeting of the Financial Advisory Commission. And it appears that all members are present, along with Alderman Arnett, Mr. Gerald, City Manager, Ms. Dickinson, Finance Director, Boards and Commission Clerk, Kim Ronsky from Finance Department, and Lynn Farrow, Assistant City Manager. So welcome, everybody. And I sent out an agenda a few days ago for review. Any revisions or corrections to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So move.
Motion made by Mr. Burton,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Cardillo. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Motion's approved. And you'll note there's a very, I'm not going to say brief or short agenda, but not much on the agenda. This is a special meeting to focus on the proposed FY22 city budget and to receive a presentation from the Finance Department and City Manager on the budget. This is substantially very similar to the presentation that was given to the City Council last week. Were any of the commission members in attendance at that work session? No, okay, I was. So it'll be old hat for me. Faye, you were there?
Yes, I was there as well.
Okay, good. So it may be a little bit repetitive, but it certainly can't hurt us to hear it again. There's a lot of good information in there. And from my view of the world, it looks fairly encouraging considering what we were perhaps anticipating last year, as might have been the situation for FY22. So what I'm going to do, and let me say, there are a couple of things here. Number one, there's going to be the budget presentation that will deal with the proposed operating and capital budgets. And then we also have been referred the fines and fees resolutions and related materials. I don't know that we'll get to that today. We may or we may not. But from my review of it over the weekend, it does not appear that there's anything real significant that we should be overly concerned about with either of those, but I'll leave that up to you all when we get to it. So why don't we start, if we may, Jody and David, with your presentation of the proposed 2022 operating and capital budgets.
So I'll start first and then turn it over to Jody. So just a couple of really high level comments. First and foremost is we submit a balanced budget without a tax increase. So I think that's a good news story and this time of COVID. Of course, that's assisted in a large part through the ARPA money that we're getting from the federal government. The other sort of good news story is that we don't need to use the entire amount of the ARPA money to balance the budget this year. So as long as the council is prudent and doesn't touch what I would like to consider a lockbox of remaining ARPA money for next fiscal year, we will have about $2 million as a projection now left over to apply to the FY23 budget as well. That money lasts, I think, until the end of 24, if I remember correctly. So we have some flexibility in carrying that money over. And we talked, I think, at the last meeting about the fact that if we use all of that this year and then have to face up to the deficit in 23, that we're kind of kicking the can down the road. But because we're going to have some of that carryover, hopefully, depending on how the budget process goes, that will help smooth the transition away from COVID and back to normal budget in FY23. FY23 will also have new labor agreements that will be negotiated this year that will go into place as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jody for the presentation.
Thank you, David, and welcome, Jody.
I was muted. That didn't help. I'll have Ryan put up the PowerPoint presentation. Kim, are you meaning to mute yourself, Kim? You're not on mute.
I talk to myself. Uh,
Hi there, I apologize. My system's requiring me to restart Zoom in order to share the screen. So it'll take maybe 10 seconds.
Okay. How's everybody doing this lovely morning?
We're hanging in there, Jody.
I'm barely hanging in there.
Jody, you see where I'm sitting.
Yeah,
Let's hope.
yeah. Nice not having to get up so early to come over to City Hall, isn't it? All right, so I'm gonna have to move the windows. See if I can get them changed. How do I get the windows to go across the top? Because it's gonna hide the right side of my screen.
You just drag it, Jody. Just grab it.
Oh,
at the
drag it
top
up
and
to the
drag it
top
over.
and it'll automatically pop up there? No, it's not.
It should.
Okay. It didn't work. Never mind. I'm just gonna put you way over on the side.
Thank you.
And so if somebody has a question and I can't see you, just go ahead and holler. All right, so you can go to the first slide, Ryan. Thank you. All right, so looking at 21, and I think at the last meeting I gave you what was my updated projections and cash flows that has the revenue and the expense for 21 and the fund balance activity from 20 to 21 and through to 22. So these numbers that you see should reflect that. And if you don't have the most updated version, please let me know. We have general fund revenue projected at 80,066,000. And our expenditures are 80,281,100. I'm gonna get my detail out here. And that is projected to leave us with some extra fund balance at the end of the year. Please go to the next slide. In the revenue assumptions for 22, we look at property tax and we have a new 3-year assessment. It's anticipated to increase our revenues by 1.68 million over FY21. And again, this is important because it is 64% of our revenue. Our income tax revenue, we had a slight decrease in 21 and we're expecting flat to 22. But that is a good news story because we had lowered the budget for the income taxes significantly. I took a discount on that going into 21 because I thought we were going to, because everybody was out of work, we were going to have lower numbers, but it actually is looking pretty good. We had budgeted the 7.4 million and we're going to end up with about 8.4 million. And so we're continuing that 8.4 million estimate into 22, not anticipating any increase, and hopefully we will see income taxes increase. On the tourism and group activities, we're expecting gradual improvement, increasing about $913,000 in 22 over 21. And if you're looking at your detailed revenue list, you're going to look mainly at the hotel motel tax and the admissions amusement tax. As these activities open back up again, we will start to see that revenue flow in. And again, the faster we can open up and get back to normal, the more these are going to grow. The rec and park fees, we hope to slowly recover. We have about 50% of our normal rec and parks revenues budgeted for 22. And except for the dock fees, those are almost back to full recovery, not quite, because we anticipate we're going to have the boat shows in 22. So if those go ahead, those are a substantial portion of that revenue. And we haven't seen a lot of drop off in dock activity. As the weather warms up, we start to see the same kinds of fees coming in from the harbor master. On the liquor licenses, We expect that to be flat in 22 compared to 21. The rates are the same. We have the same number of licenses, so that's expected to be flat. Development permitting increase in 22, but still not up. We're expecting it not to come to pre-COVID levels yet. On the ARPA funding, we've been told we're getting 6.64 million, and we're going to get that in two pieces in cash. One's supposed to be coming soon. We haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen the details on how they expect us to spend it and what our restrictions are. But we're going to use about 3.1 million of that for general fund revenue in FY22. This is an overall picture of the general fund revenue category, showing you the 20 actual, what we're projecting for 21, and what we're proposing in the upcoming budget. You can see there our anticipated increase in the real property taxes. Personal property going down a little bit. We're seeing some decreases in the assessment of personal properties as businesses have issues, and we've lost a few businesses over the course of the last year. So we're having some adjustments downward there. Licenses and permits, pretty flat. And if you notice there, that intergovernmental category is jumping, but $3 million of that number, 3.1 million, is the ARPA monies that we mentioned on the last slide. So that $15.9 million, if you take out the ARPA funding, you've got 12.8, which is consistent with 20, a little bit more than projected in 21. And interest, as you can see, interest is still is very low. The rates are still relatively low, and we're projecting that flat into 22 as well. I'm hoping that will turn around and the interest rates will start to climb a bit, but interest rates climbing presents issues on other in other ways. And then the charges for services, as you can see, 5.5 million anticipated for 22. That's consistent with the FY20 activity. Next slide. We're showing you the parking and transportation fund revenues here. These funds have both had challenges. Parking fund ended 20 with 6.9 million. That is not a typical year. That was low. We almost had no revenues in the last quarter of FY20. 21, we're projecting the 4.6 million. And 22, we have the $5.9 million, but it only includes 6 months of revenue for Hillman Garage. And on the transportation fund, we have the activity increasing again, but we're getting only 860,000 of a parking fund subsidy compared to what we normally would get. And in the transportation fund, because the parking fund isn't going to be able to subsidize it to the same level, we're going to have to use the remaining half of the CARES Act funding that we received a year ago. And we may even have to tap the concession payment that we'll be getting from AMRP. AMRP is our PPP arrangement on building Hillman Garage. And part of that, I don't know how familiar the commission is with that arrangement, but as a part of when they issue the debt to construct Hillman Garage, the city is going to get a concession payment up front from AMRP to use for the purposes that we determine, whether it's subsidizing transportation activities or helping to construct City Dock. We have yet to know what that payment amount is, so we may have to use some of this funding to close the gap in the transportation fund while the garage is closed. So this note at the bottom just gives you some perspective on what a normal year would be pre-COVID. Baseline budget for parking would have been 9.1 million and transportation 5.6. Next slide. On the expenditure side, we have some takeaways for 22. Salary and benefits, of course, 6.67% of our general fund expenditures in 2020, 69.7 in 21, 68.7 in 22. Their year-over-year growth, 5.9 million in 20 to 21, and from 21 to 22, it's 11.2%. I've spent a little bit of time trying to explain how the jump in from 21 to 22 is somewhat affected by one-time issues that we see in the 21 activities, such as moving some fire and other public safety salaries expenses out of the general fund to the CARES Act grant in the grant fund. So 21 projected is lower than what you would normally see it if we were in normal operations without the CARES funding. We are honoring all union contract provisions in 22. We have a year-over-year growth in contractual services, 9.1 million from 20 to 21 and 8.5 million, 21 to 22. And another notable change is our contribution to our self-insurance fund. We had a slight decline in 20 to 21, but that is increased from 21 to 22, mainly to replenish our reserves because we had a major settlement of a lawsuit back in September with HACA. We call it the HACA lawsuit. We had some inspection issues there. And that settlement had a large value. It was almost, I think it was 900,000. I don't remember the number exactly. It was close to $1 million. And so we had to replenish the reserves there. Next slide. Here's where we outline for you the general fund expenditures by department. As you see, we have some increases there. Most of that's triggered by the salary increases and pension, and including salary and benefits, I will say, because a significant amount of that is the pension percentage increase from police and fire. It's causing about a $1.1 million increase across those two departments. Next slide. And here we break out our general fund expenditures by category. And you'll see there, it's notable, the increase in the salary and benefits line, projected 55.9 million, almost 56 million, to 62. And again, there are factors in the salary increases with the COLAs, the steps, the pension percentage is going up. The healthcare expenses are a good news story because we're keeping those premiums flat again. We're still seeing some savings in healthcare. We're expecting that at some point in time when the pandemic lets up, people will start going back in for elective procedures and appointments, and we'll see a climb in our healthcare expenses. But to date, because of COVID, but also because of some measures we took in the healthcare plans, we have been able to keep those premiums flat now for, we actually decreased the premiums coming into 21 by 15%. So that has kept those expenses under control. We have some increases in the other categories. I'm trying to see if there's anything of note there. You see that there, I see the self-insurance contribution increase there, 2 million in 21 to 2.8 million. We just talked about that. Okay, we'll move on. If anybody has questions on those, we'll have to look to the details on where it occurred. On the general fund 22 budget totals, we have recurring revenues of 84,754,000. We are using 3,085,000 of the ARPA funds for a total 87,840. And on the expenditure side, we have recurring expenses of the 87,840. We're going to use some capital reserve fund monies, $2 million for ongoing capital projects. And we are going to use some of the expenses that are in your departmental expenses are one-time expenses, and we're using our reserve for one-time uses to cover those. And that's 700,000. As we complete our FY21 audit, any fund balance that's in excess of our 15% requirement will be used to replenish either the budget stabilization fund, and the rest will or be split between the two other reserves. But the way it's projected right now, don't think we're going to have to tap the budget stabilization fund in FY21. If you remember, when we established the budget for 21, we had projected we need about $400,000 of that, but it's looking a better picture for 21. We've been able to keep expenses under control, so we're not going to have to tap that. The budget stabilization fund is already at its calculated limit or above it, so we won't be putting any excess there. We are going to split the remainder between the two other reserves. And if you look at the fund balance schedule that I provided in those projection schedules, you'll see I created an extra column to show you the excess right now is calculated at just above $2 million, and we're splitting that $1 million each into those reserves. Next slide. The pension costs, 20 to 22. Of course, this is a story in our budgets, kind of been ongoing for the past couple of years, based on our actuarial study that looked at all of our assumptions. We went from 22.13% of salaries as an employer contribution in FY 2020. In 21, we're providing 28.23% of salaries, and that's going to go to 34.77 in 22. Keep in mind that the climb in the last 2 years was divided over 2 years intentionally, and we took the more critical actuarial changes in the first year and put the rest into place in the second year. So I would anticipate that 34.77 should be rather consistent going forward, since we've fully implemented the actuarial recommendations. We may see the amount go up and down based on investment results in the markets. That could go lower or higher. But every year the actuary is going to take a look at how the fund is doing and what's going on with our assumptions versus what's really occurring, and changing that number accordingly. But I think we're almost to the point where the point that we should be as a percent of salaries for a typical police and fire government plan. It's going to result in a cost increase of 1.1 million for 22. And okay, we talked about the actuarial study. So the state pension rate's going up slightly from 10.24% of salaries to 10.57. And that's, I estimate that increased of 59,000 in 22 for the general fund. This is a slide that shows you that we're complying with our fund balance policy, looking at what's going to be there in what we're projecting for the end of FY21. And if you calculate our 15% requirement, you take the revenues of those three funds, general fund, parking, and transportation funds, and that's $100 million. 15% of that's the 15 million requirement. And based on my current projections, FY21 should end with 17.2 million. So that's the 2 million that I spoke of earlier, 2.2 million, and we're going to split that between the two reserves. Next slide. This shows you where we anticipate the different parts of fund balance to end at the end of 21. Again, we'll set the general fund balance reserve, the undesignated reserve at 15 million requirement. The budget stabilization fund will have 3 million, and the capital reserve and one-time uses funds are just a little over $5 million each. Next slide. The parking fund. In 21, we're projecting revenues at about $2.5 million less than what we budgeted. And that is due to a couple factors. One, there's fewer people parking in the garage. And we provided some free parking over the first 6 months of the fiscal year to try to encourage people to come down and shop at the stores down here, and eat at the restaurants to try to promote more activity at the local businesses. We had to eliminate then the subsidy that the parking fund was supposed to send to the transportation fund, which was about 2.6 million. So that strained the transportation fund. There are going to be some savings in parking because the operating costs for SP Plus are based somewhat on activity. So we've had some reductions there. So what we're predicting now is that the parking fund itself will end with a deficit of about 723,000. And we're going to use some of our initial ARPA funding of 6.6 million to cover that in 21. And to our FY22 projections for the parking fund assume that the Hillman Garage will start demolition January 2022 after the holidays. And we'll have no revenues for the last 6 months of 22. However, in our 22 projections, we did increase the revenues at our other garages incrementally. We didn't assume that everybody would go to our garages and we'd make up that revenue other places, but we did increase those estimates for the other garages because there's going to be capacity limitations too there. And 22 projected revenues are about 1.2 million less than the 21 budget. On the transportation fund, we have projected revenues in 21 that are about 815,884 less than our budget. And our budget did include some CARES funding. We didn't get the subsidy again from the parking fund, and it's projected to leave the fund with a deficit of 1.9 million, but the CARES Act money, now that's before the CARES Act money and the ARPA funding will be used to balance the fund. We have, let's see, it's about 2 million. 1.3 million of CARES Act money that we're going to use this fiscal year in 21. And that's not quite enough to close the difference on the fund. So we're going to use about, 815,000 of that number in the first bullet there. That's what we need from the ARPA funds, if I'm correct about that. We have it on another slide, I think, so we'll see it in a minute. There are some savings occurring during to reduce services and fuel costs. As you know, we've had a lot of time where we're on reduced routes. And I just talked about the CARES Act funding in the next bullet, 1.3 million that we'll be using in 21. Oh, here we go. So the deficit's not the 800. The deficit is going to be a resulting 603,000, and that's going to be covered with the ARPA funds. The projected revenues for 22 are going to be 1.2 million greater than 21 budget. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is, I thought this is useful. This shows you what we're planning to do with the ARPA funding. Our allocation that we know of, $6.6 million. We're going to use those two amounts that I told you to help the FY21 parking fund and transportation funds to balance. And then we have allocated the $3.1 million to the general fund. That should leave about $2.2 million to carry forward into 23. So in 22, the $3.1 million for the general fund, that could be more or less, hopefully less, as we're able to save money, or maybe revenues will turn around faster than we anticipate. We won't have to use the $3.1 million in any of that. That's carrying forward, that's left will carry forward in 23. Next slide. On the enterprise funds, we don't have any changes in our sewer rates. The fund balance is strong, and there's no anticipated need, and we're going to try to use some of that fund balance to cover future expenses until we get it down to a rate where we think we need to start increasing the fees. On water rates, we're increasing those by 4%. We have a lot of ongoing capital projects that are adding to debt service and pay-go funding requirements. That's one of the reasons why the water rates are going to have to go up. On the watershed restoration fund, we're increasing the rates by 5% from 19 for a quarter to 19.95 per quarter. And these rates are stated on our standard rates. Their water, sewer, and watershed rates are based on the size of the meters, et cetera. But those rates that you see are based on your typical single family home. On the solid waste rate, we're increasing at 9.5% from $274 to $300. So next slide, I think we're almost done here. In the CIP, we have general fund projects totaling $11.8 million, and 7.2 of that is bonds from the general fund. And then some of these projects that are in our CIP are using enterprise funds, repaying them, such as our public works facility that we're building out. What's the name of that street it's on?
Hudson Street.
Hudson.
Hudson. Okay, couldn't hear you first. So we're building a facility out there, and some of that's being funded with enterprise funds because they're going to use part of that space. The grants are going to fund about 1.7 million, and we have a capital reserve fund contribution. Most of that's going into the sidewalks and roadway improvements. And we are reducing the CRAB grant, the CRAB CIP. We've purchased the Bemby Beach Road location for CRAB to lease for their boating activities. And we have bought that, and that's going to, so that's the only thing the city's doing for that space. CRAB is going to do the improvements themselves. So we're reducing that project down to zero since our work is done. On the enterprise fund projects, we're putting another $6 million in there in 22. And that's split between bonds of 3.4 million and pay-go of 2.6 million.
Just a quick note on the CIP, and we have a joint meeting of the Finance Committee and the FAC next Tuesday, where we'll go in much greater detail in the capital budget, as well as the fund increases or the fee increases that you saw for the enterprise funds. But for the CIP, we've really pulled back. We didn't introduce any new projects this year. It's just a continuation of existing projects. For new projects, we're going to take more time to scope those, and then introduce the ones that are the high priority ones next year, but decided to give those a pause for this year, just to catch up with the ones that are in the system and do a better job of scoping those projects.
Excuse me, David,
Yes.
did I hear you say something about a meeting next week?
Yeah, we have scheduled next Tuesday. The Finance Committee meeting is also a joint meeting with the FAC. So if you all want to join that, you're welcome to, because it's going to be a discussion of the CIP, the debt affordability, and the enterprise funds rate increases.
Okay, I don't know why that went over my head. I wasn't aware of it. I don't have it on my calendar. But what date was it, David?
It's
27th?
the 27th. Yeah, and it's from 10 to 1. It's the regular Finance Committee budget meeting, but on that day it was meant to be a joint meeting with FAC.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, David.
No, it was Ross. I was wondering if you could indulge me and go back to slide 12. Yes. So for those of us who were there with the Blue Ribbon Committee years ago, Who would have ever thought we would have this kind of position? I mean, look at what the city, with the help of the FAC, has done for itself. I think that the FAC should give themselves a pat on the back, of course, along with the city staff. But remember when we had no reserves, and now look at where we are. We have to feel pretty good about this picture. We meet our fund requirements, but we have these additional funds so that if something really catastrophic, and it would have to be hugely catastrophic for us to be in trouble. So hats off to the FAC on that slide. I was thinking about it when Jody was going over it.
When you talk about the blue ribbon committee, is that where you set the policy for the fund balances, et cetera, and set up the reserves?
Yeah, so the FAC was formed when Mayor Cohen was facing no reserves and cash flow problems. We had to take two $10 million lines of credit just to meet
Okay.
payroll and vendors.
Mhm.
And so the fact, and by the way, Fred, I just exchanged emails with Lee Finney this morning. So it was, and Bob was there at the beginning too, but we were in dire straits. I mean, we were really on the ropes. And now I just
Yeah,
have
okay.
to tell you, it makes me feel good to see this picture. So
Yeah, I'm really pleased that we continue to keep those capital reserve funds up and the one-time use reserve high, even though we use them every year, to the tune that we think we need to in the capital project, but we continue to have the success in our revenues and our expenditures to provide a little extra to fall in there every year. And one of the things that's helped over the past few years is the fact that we're now tracking everything in the budget. Earlier, they had a lot of the activities outside the budget process, and when those would spend over, you wouldn't really see it, but it would eat down fund balance. So the fact that we now set the budget for everything we're spending, we can track it more clearly and keep expenses in line when revenues are falling short. So that's also a success story over the last few years.
So, Ross, thank you very much for the kind words. Greatly appreciated on behalf of the FAC. And I think a lot of hard work has gone in, to the whole budget process with staff and the finance committee, the city council, the FAC. A good team effort, and I think we need to continue it. I have a couple of comments or questions, but I see Bob Burns has raised his hand. So go ahead, Bob.
Yes, if we could go to slide 15, please. I just have a couple observations and questions just to be certain that my understanding is correct on this. Slide 15 shows the allocation of the federal funds, the ARPA funds in particular, going to cover the transportation fund deficit plus the FY22 general fund potential deficit that would exist if we didn't have that federal money.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the parking fund deficit. From what my understanding is that if we didn't have these ARPA funds and the CARE funds, we would still be facing a structural deficit problem when it comes to covering salaries and pensions and benefits. The transportation fund over the years has always been a source of challenge for the city in terms of, addressing that continuing deficit that's there. The parking fund for a period of time was able to assist in that, but given COVID and so forth, the revenues have fallen there. That does not permit that to happen. So from a larger perspective, if my understanding is correct, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if it weren't for the ARPA and CARES fund, the FY22 budget would be a little bit more challenging to get it balanced. Is that correct?
Yes, but keep in mind that the challenge that's creating this whole situation is the pandemic. If if you look at revenues from 20 to 21 to 22, you're seeing it pretty flat overall. And what we don't know is what those would have been if it would have been a normal year. So what we're hoping to see is this structural deficit is this 3.1 million that we're having to use from this one-time source that carries forward, but at a lesser amount in 23 with the 2.2 million. But what we're hoping to see is that the other revenues related to tourism and taxes, et cetera, climb back up to more normal levels and will take the place of this ARPA funding that we're using to make the general fund work. And at the same time, we renegotiate union agreements so that our commitments are different than they are now. And so we'll have to bring those expenses in line with whatever those revenue sources are showing in 23. We've got a little help to smooth the way. And then in 24, we'll have a better picture of where those expenses need to be. But each year we have to bring the expenses in line with what we have here. And we've got an opportunity with our union negotiations coming up.
I think, and that was sort of the direction in which I was going with my questions and my desire to want to understand this a little bit better, because I would, it appears to me that, the salaries, benefits, and pensions, I mean, that type of growth rate just doesn't seem to be sustainable without significant additional influx of revenue coming in. We've talked in the past when we're dealing with benefits and to some degree pensions, because we're on a defined benefit type of program rather than defined contribution.
Right.
And, these are some issues that the FACT has raised over the last couple of years that we feel need to be addressed long term if we're going to get some of this under some of this growth under something more manageable, if you will, than what we've experienced over the last couple of years here. The transportation fund, again, I can understand where you're coming from on that with the COVID, challenge that all municipalities have faced in reductions in revenues. But the transportation fund has been a continuing, ongoing problem way before COVID, with that deficit that's continuing to be there and how to manage that. As I said, the parking fund did help out in that until COVID hit. Parking revenues dropped, and which sort of magnified the transportation fund deficit and how to deal with it. But I concur, and I agree with you, Jody, that with the union contracts coming up for renegotiation, those are going to be critical. And longer term, the bounce back after the economy starts opening back up again, our hope is that it will come back quicker. It'd be nice to see it come back as quick as as we lost it, within a 12-month period of time, coming back to full pre-pandemic levels. But everything I'm reading and that I'm seeing is that it may take a little bit longer than that to get back to full pre-pandemic levels. And if you bring that down to the municipal level here in the city of Annapolis, that would mean a little bit more, due diligence that we all have to pay towards how we control expenses if we want to avoid any type of, tax or fee increases that may be out of the ordinary.
Yes, and I wanted to comment a little bit on the transportation fund. Due to the transportation fund could not conceivably be break even. We cannot set transportation fees high enough to meet the cost of the system. And it is, besides being subsidized by the parking fund and or the general fund over the course of time, it's substantially funded by grant monies. The state of Maryland and the federal government provide us a substantial amount of revenues to support that activity. If you tried to set the bus rates high enough to ride the buses and operate the system, it would be unaffordable. The people that need it wouldn't be able to afford it. So, and it's important to have that transportation system. So it's a subsidized activity and the subsidization is planned. We cover a lot of with grants and hopefully we can, as the Hillman Garage is closed and we set up this PPP, we can find other resources to help us fund the transportation fund. But I just wanted to comment that it will always be a subsidized activity based on the nature of it.
Yeah, Jody, I think we recognize that. The question is to what degree do we have to subsidize it? And I know in the past, and this will probably be subject for discussion in the year going forward, but in the past, there were attempts to take a look at, the transportation fund and what generates its revenues and what generates its expenses, and how to better perhaps manage or organize the transportation function in the city to be able to, achieve the greatest efficiencies that we can out of it, recognizing that we're still going to be in a deficit situation, but be able to, manage that deficit and perhaps, and keep it manageable in years going forward. And I know that in previous attempts to do that over the years, those have met challenges themselves. There's been some starts and stops and stuff like that. I just hope as we go forward in the coming year that we could, take another look at that transportation fund and, look at, what we've done in the past and how we might be able to address that in the future, as well as going back and reviewing, Fred, and I pass this on to you for future agendas, but perhaps going back and looking at how the FAC, could provide follow-up input on, the benefits and pensions portion, of the city, and some of the advisory opinions we gave in the past, and whether we need to go back and review those again.
Okay. I know that over the next year, we will be looking at the transportation system based on our arrangement with the AMRP and the building of the Hillman Garage. That's going to change the transportation picture substantially because the Hillman revenues will go to AMRP for quite a few years. So we're going to have to figure out how to make that work and balance.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for those comments. I see first Frank Brown had his hand up, and then Jim Cardillo had his hand up. We'll go to Frank, and then we'll go to Jim. And Jody, thanks for your follow-up on that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would just like to suggest that we try to anticipate some other avenues of income in as much as looking at future projections. Bob made the comment, which struck the idea in my head, is that in trying to get back to pre-pandemic levels, I don't know if that's the path that we should go down, for the simple fact that there has been a dynamic shift in the way things are being done. People are looking at things differently. So I think that we need to look at alternative ways of evaluating things and look at other sources to try to offset those, because professionally, I don't think we will ever get back to the way we were, because things are just going to be different.
Thank you, Frank. Jim?
Thanks. Going back, let's stay on this slide right now. I have a question about this planned use in the FY22 general fund, the 3.1 million, and it could be more or it could be less. What would drive that to be more or less?
All right. So right now, my 22 budget is based on estimates. All right. And we estimate revenues coming in at a certain level and expenditures to be at a certain level. Well, I never hit it right on the nose, and try to be conservative on both the revenue and the expenditure side. Typically, we have some savings where departments don't quite all spend all of their allocated funds. So there's savings in each department that tend to add up over the course of all departments. And as long as we're successful in getting those revenues if it fluctuates, it's on the positive side, that's the negative side. But what I'm saying is
Okay.
because our budget's based on projections, if revenues come in lower or higher than expected, that will increase or lessen the amount of money we have to use from ARPA. Again, on the expense side, if we're able to rein in expenses a little tighter than what budget set, then we will have some savings there too and not have to use as much ARPA.
Thanks. So the ARPA drawdown is really the plug
It
to
is.
balance
Yeah,
22,
correct.
and that's your best estimate right now as to what that plug number will be. Great,
Yes.
thank you. Can I go back to one question with regards to the general fund expenditures by category? It's an earlier slide. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Let's go back to general fund revenues by category.
That's pretty much,
That's where we go, the 83 million for FY20, the
okay,
80.1
let's
for
back
FY20.
up.
Ryan,
Ryan, can you
That's
move
the
it?
one.
No, this
Uh,
is expenditures.
That's expenditures. Let's go back earlier to the revenue one.
Okay, there you
I
go.
think,
And this is where the 15.9 million includes the projected 3.1 million in ARPA funds.
Yes,
Um,
it's in that
in the-
15.9, yes.
right, in the 21 column, the CARES Act money, is that also an intergovernmental?
No, so what happens with the CARES Act monies, we are accounting for that in the grant fund, not in the general fund. So
Oh,
what
okay.
happens is, as
Okay.
we incur things in the general fund that are eligible for CARES Act funding, we remove the expense from the general fund and move it
Okay.
over to the grant
Thank
fund.
Okay, so indeed, the ARPA money is indeed a net increase in general fund revenues. It's not simply an amount on top of CARES Act funding.
Correct. So,
Good.
and the reason we're handling that a little differently is because the CARES Act funding was limited to a particular purpose. It had to address the effects of COVID in the community. So we take the expenses that are eligible for that and move them there. But this, as we've heard, I haven't seen any detailed instructions on how we're allowed to use it, can be a replacement for revenue loss.
Revenue loss, right.
So we will eventually set up a grant in the grant fund with the ARPA
Correct.
money, and
Right.
as needed, transfer that money to the general fund as a revenue source. Because it's not hooked to any particular expense, it's to replenish revenues in the general fund. So we will transfer
Yeah.
the money from grants there. So that's
Yep,
how we'll.
offset in general fund expenditures. Okay,
Mhm.
thank you, thank you. Perfect.
okay, I have actually two questions. First, can we go to slide 9? And I see total revenue of 87,840 and total expenses of 90,621. Does that reflect an unbalanced budget, or am I missing something somewhere?
No, what's happened there is that delta is because we're using capital reserve funds for the purposes for which we saved them for. It's like when you use your personal income, to save up for a car, we're using that savings to use that. So what we need to make sure is an unbalanced situation is being when the revenues, the recurring revenues are not enough to cover recurring expenses. And as you see, the first line there, 84.7 million recurring revenues is not enough to cover the 87 million of recurring expenses. So we've used the 3 million of the ARPA funds to make up that difference. The use of the capital reserve funds, as you know, any excess in our activities every year that gets split in these two reserves, and we use that excess for these one-time purposes. So we're just showing you total expenses because we have to budget for every expenditure of money. We have to set a budget for it, whether it's coming out of a savings account or whether it's coming out of our current revenues. We have to budget.
Right.
for it.
Yeah, I understand that, Jody. So just for my naive or uneducated, unsophisticated mind, why is not shown on both sides? One on the revenue side and the other on the expenditure side, so
Yeah.
that the numbers balance out.
Right. So that's something that Alderman Arnett has brought up a few times, and we did create a table in the budget book that shows that delta as a planned use of fund balance. So you can see that we could show it another way by pulling a bullet up front, a bullet up top saying planned use of fund balance, and that would equal it out.
Mhm.
That 2.781 is a planned use of fund balance reserves. And that
Okay.
could be called a revenue source.
Mhm.
But what we're showing you now is new monies coming in versus the monies going out. And we
All right,
do
so
have
bottom line is it will all be balanced. It's just how it's reflected here.
Yeah, it's how we're showing it to you in this presentation. And like you said, we have added that presentation to the budget book so you can see, here's all our sources. And one of our sources is the fund balance. And so
Right.
the fund balance reserves, these are sources. And then you add them to the incoming monies and that equals what you're spending. So in that way, it
Yeah.
does show it's balanced.
Okay, thank you, Jody. And fact members, if you remember, I did send you by email the budget book for the operating budget and capital budget and capital program. So that's where you can find that information. David, just want to, clarify or not clarify, just reiterate what I thought I heard you say earlier and that I recall you saying to the city council with respect to the capital budget, that there are no new capital project planned for this year, and that the capital budget reflects, FY22 expenditures for existing capital projects that have not yet been completed.
I would like to, David, you can reply to that. We do have a couple of new projects in there, mostly grant funded. And I wanted to clarify that there are a couple of new things in there, but David can explain them. We have a couple new DNR projects that are funded with DNR funds, and we're doing a Robert Eads Park that has a little bit of bonds in it.
So Fred, it's no new general fund that's going to tap either bond issuances or capital funding from the general fund. So there's a couple for grant funding. I think they're park end projects or street end projects, those types of things, but no new general fund projects.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Bob Burden, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, just a question. Are we going to be reviewing Davenport's debt capacity update this morning that you sent in your
We can, if you
emails?
want to. Yes, we can.
Yeah, yes, I would like you to, you or David, to be able to discuss that for a few minutes after we finish with fact questions. And I see that it looks like Jim Cardillo has his hand up. So Jim, go ahead.
Thanks. With regards to this slide number 9, at the bottom, it says that current projections for 21 anticipate in excess, and it says, however, many factors could change. What are some of the factors that would swing the 21 projection to be greater or less than where we think we're going to end up? I mean,
the thing I expect that would affect it the most is revenues. If something happens on the revenue side that I'm not anticipating. The most recent that I've done these estimates, I think, was early March. So I haven't yet seen what's coming with income taxes. We have a couple more distributions of income taxes, but those are fairly well established. That could impact it. I don't anticipate any big swing in expenses because we know what we have left, and everything we're doing from here on out, we're looking for existing budget appropriations to cover it. So I don't see anything in the near future that's going to be a huge increase in expense unless something major happened in the community that we needed to pay out money for. I don't see any major fluctuation in expenses.
when the state delays income tax deadlines, does that move the date in which we receive the transfers?
It does not move the date that we receive them. Conceivably, it could have some impact on the dollars, but the biggest distributions that we get from the state are calculated way ahead of time. And they give us that amount, whether or not we get a lot more or we have a lot less. And then they usually make up for it in one of the smaller payments. They'll either give us the difference, or they'll take back. They'll reduce the distribution by that amount. So based on where we're at in the year, we only have, I think, one more distribution that we don't know the amount of, but it's a smaller distribution. So I'm not anticipating much of an impact on that number. That distribution could be a lot smaller. That's something I can't know until they tell me what it is. That could be a couple $100,000 difference. Other than that, the revenue, if nobody was coming to town and we weren't getting occupancy taxes, that number could fall short. If we had really bad weather and nobody was bringing their boat down to the harbor, that might impact what we've estimated. So I would say, to answer your question, the risk more is that the revenues wouldn't turn out as we've projected. The expenses, we have them pretty much well estimated at this point.
Thanks.
Okay,
Yeah, Fred, I have one
yeah.
additional question.
yes, you, Bob, and then it looks like Ed Meehan has his hand up. So go ahead, you first, and then Ed.
Yeah, just Jody, just to follow up on the brief discussion you had there on potential revenue projections. When we're looking at real property taxes, and there was some discussion on this that we had in previous FAC meetings. Has there been any anticipation or indication from the state, particularly within the commercial sector, about potential delinquencies and payment of real property taxes that may affect cash flows and that particular revenue stream?
No, nothing. And we haven't seen anything impacting our revenue stream in that regard. Even surprising on the commercial side that we're not seeing more.
Okay, so you don't anticipate that would be a potential
Not at this
challenge?
Not at this point. As we go through the year, any reduction in the assessed value of real property goes through the state to the county, and then we see it in our county distributions as being lower than anticipated. So I won't know that until we start getting the county distributions for next year. But as far as this year, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that my question was not based upon the assessed value of the properties and what happens to that assessment. It was more based upon the ability, particularly in the commercial sector with significant reductions in revenues there, whether there'd be potential delinquencies in paying those property tax bills that would delay cash flow coming into the city as well as obviously to the state as well.
Okay.
That was more my question because, there has been some discussion on a more broader plane, not just pertaining to Annapolis or Maryland, but across the country, that particularly in the area of property taxes and particularly in the commercial sector, with the significant reductions in revenues that we're seeing, there may be some challenges in meeting those property tax bills on their due dates, which may create some delinquency that eventually will be caught up and paid, but nonetheless would create some potential cash flow challenges, for municipalities if that took place. So that was the direction of my question there.
All right. So I will say I haven't heard anything from the state or the county in that regard, that they're having that type of significant payment issues. And as you know, as you just stated, anything that doesn't come in will eventually be collected, whether it's from the owner of the property or through tax sale. But they are a year behind on the tax sales. They didn't have a tax sale last year, so right now the tax sale is going to take care of anything from last year that was delinquent. And the delinquent properties from this year won't be collected till the next tax sale. So there is a little bit delay, although it has not impacted us
Okay.
significantly.
Okay, thank you, Jody. Appreciate it.
Mhm.
Thanks, Bob. Next, Ed Meehan. Ed?
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Actually, it shows the efficiency of this body, but the questions I was going to pose have now been addressed and captured in some of the comments as well. So the only thing I'll just say very briefly is that, I think this work in the session today really reflects that, staff is doing a very responsible job at dealing with, a highly unusual situation that we hope is going to be going away soon. And so, I want to compliment folks on that. We'll see where things go. We need to continue to be very careful stewards of the revenue that's coming in. And it looks to me as if there's a very responsible effort here to do just that. So my questions and other comments have now been addressed. So thank you very much.
Fred, I don't have a hand button on my Zoom for some reason. Could I follow up on
Yeah,
that?
hold. Yeah, sure. Go ahead. And then I'll take whoever else has their hand up.
Well, I really want to echo what Ed just said, and I have to tell you, I was facing this coming budget with a great deal of trepidation. I remember this time last year, we were talking about, should we make some major slashes, maybe $5 million in spending in anticipation of a bad COVID experience. We did have a bad COVID experience, but not as much as we were dreading. And I have to say, I've told David this, but Jody hasn't heard me say it. I really feel quite good about this budget. I feel that we've got a balanced budget. I think that it is helped certainly by the federal money, and we do have work ahead of us once those one-time only monies go away. But I also want to add my appreciation for the work that the city manager and the finance director and all the staff, because remember, it was the staff that held down spending. So that's made things work out pretty good for us. So I want to thank you.
Ross, thank you for those comments. I think, they're greatly appreciated. I certainly echo them as well. I know that the fact over the past year has continually harped on David and Jody. What are you doing? What are you planning? Do you have plan B? Do you have plan C and this? And they've repeatedly said, we're monitoring it. We'll have it under control and da, 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 da. And gosh darn if they haven't done that. So David, to you and to Jody and to the staff, congratulations. Are there any, I don't see any other fact members with their hands up. So what I'd like to do now is ask David and Jody to give us a kind of summary of Davenport's financial advisor report on debt affordability.
All right.
If you would.
And to comment on that, yeah, the staff throughout the departments was critical in helping us keep expenses under control. And we're not over the hump yet. We just have a good plan forward, I think, and this ARPA funding was critical to us not having to take drastic steps with the workforce, which we were on track to work with the workforce and what we were going to have to do. And providing the council still has to approve the budget. So if there's no major changes there, I think we have a plan forward, but we still have to keep things under control.
Yep. Well, I think you've instilled a lot of confidence in a lot of people. So I just urge you all to keep it up. So
Okay.
if you
wanted to move on to debt affordability, I was going to ask Ryan to put up the presentation, the PDF that he would have received this morning. And I have to apologize, that when these meetings start at 8 o'clock, I'm a little bit foggy brained in the morning, so it's a little hard for me to get going.
Yeah, hey,
Get
Jody,
my brain
just so you
working.
know, I did send this out a few days ago to the fact members.
Okay.
So I don't know if any of them have
Well,
looked
there
at
might
it,
be
but
there might be a slight change because before we presented to the work session last week, we got a revised version because we had a couple of small tweaks. Now I don't know if you sent it out last week with the work session stuff, it'd be the same one. So it depends on which one it was.
It was after the work session.
Okay, then this is the most recent one. Then they should have that in their emails. All right, so if you could go to the next slide. It's not a slide. Go to the next page. So this shows you debt service. Our goal is to keep debt service between 10 and 12%. 10 is our goal, 12 is our ceiling. And the first column shows you the current debt service. And that's based on the bonds that we have issued currently. That next column, new debt service, anticipates that we will sell all of the debt that we currently have approved but not issued, because we haven't issued all the debt for all of our existing capital projects because they're not, we're issuing debt as we need for the cash flow. So that next column includes both the debt that has been authorized but unissued and our new debt service per the CIP through FY22. And if you issued all that debt, this projects the debt service that will occur based on that assumption. Then it compares it to general fund expenditures there, and that next to the last column, that 90,621,000 are the expenditures that are in our general fund budget, which we just saw on one of the slides. And it shows you what that is as a percent of our total general fund expense. It tells you what debt service is as a percent of general fund expenditures. Next slide. So when you put all that on a graph and you show the 10% target, 11% line there in the middle and the 12% ceiling, you see where that projects to over time. And as you'll see that although we are between 10 and 11, this is a very conservative estimate because we never issue the debt when we intend to. When it is placed in the CIP, the years we have not issued all the debt that we've been authorized so far. So this will be a better picture. This is a very conservative projection of where those expenses are as a percent of general fund expenditures. So this is a good depiction and this is what I tend to look at more because it visualizes where we're at. If you go to the next slide, these next few slides just tell you what kind of capacity we currently have. If we're shooting for our 10% target, our 11% midpoint, or our 12% ceiling, how much debt could we afford to issue? And this is before the application of the CIP. But if you go to the next slide, this is the borrowing amounts in the CIP and the unissued, the previously authorized but unissued debt. Okay, and go to the next slide, please. All right, so after we would apply all that debt and issue it all, this is the capacity that we would have left. And as you see, we're already over the 10% target, so we have nothing left if we want to stay within the 10% target. If we were going to try to get to the 11% point, we would have a little bit of debt capacity. You see there, not much to affect any real significant capital improvements. And then if we were going to go to the 12% ceiling line, we'd have a little bit more capacity in the program. So I think that's the end. If you go to the last page, yeah, that's just the small print, all the disclaimers. So that's it. I don't know if you want to go back to anything and look at any of that in detail. The first two pages are the most useful to me.
Jody, thank you. Ross, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, this is the right page because Joe Mason pointed out to us when this was presented, there are some very conservative assumptions in this table in terms of the growth weights assumed. He's assuming that expenditures only increase at 1%. He's assuming low bond rates, but very quickly moves to 5% bond rates that we're paying. So even in this table, there's a nice amount of conservatism that builds in. So as Director Dickinson pointed out, this is probably the worst case scenario for several reasons, which again, should make us feel more comfortable.
Thank you for the explanation, Ross. Appreciate it. Do I see any other hands up? No, I don't. Yeah, Jody, thank you for that. David, do you have anything to add to that? Not that you have to, but just want to give you the opportunity if you do.
No, I was just going to add what Ross beat me to, that this is a very conservative estimate. As he said, that, you know, the denominator, which is the general fund expenditures, is only increasing 1%. We know that that's very, very conservative. So, yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the financial advisor debt affordability report? If not, I'd like to move on briefly and ask David or Jody, whichever one of you want to tackle this. And that has to do with the fees and fines. I looked over the materials over the weekend, and it looked like there are very few, changes in recommended changes to the fees and fines. Can somebody tell us what process you went through this year in making that determination as to what, if any, changes should be made?
Or do you want to do that?
David or
No,
Jody?
yeah, I can do that. I thought you were reaching for your mic there. So, well, what we do is we ask all the departments to look at their fees, first of all, and their fines, make sure they think they're properly calculated. We do have a few changes this year, not many, and most of them are from our permits, our permitting section, and the fees that they charge for various things. I believe we have some changes in there related to people that have zoning disputes, and somebody else is going to have to give more details on that. We also changed the fees. Those fee changes for watershed restoration and refuse fund and water and sewer, those are all in there as well as changes. I think there's only one fine that's changed in there, if I recall. But somebody else would have to go into detail on what's changed on the fee side, because that's planning and zoning. And it would be nice to have Sally here to talk about the details. But she did have some changes, some increases to fees, some new fees, and one of them is relating to people that have zoning disputes and
some filing fee.
Yeah, the
fees to
filing
Board
fees
of
for
Building-
appeals. Yeah, for
Appeal
appeals
to the-
and
to the
appeals and
Building Board
appeals
of
and
Appeals.
appeals.
Yeah, and that was a handful of them, and just making it consistent, throughout the code. Bob?
Yeah, Jody, what's causing the 5% increase in the water restoration fees again, please?
So right now, the watershed restoration fund has a fund balance, but we are just now kicking into some large capital improvements that are going to move forward. We've been planning those for the last 2-3 years, and the construction part of it's been delayed. We've had, and I know David can add more to this. I'll let him take over. We've had a firm kind of doing our planning for us to see what needs to happen, and we're about ready to move forward. So this model that does the fee increase projects those capital improvements in the future years. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, so Bob, this is to cover what we call the MS4 project. So that's a municipal separate stormwater system projects. We have a permit through the state where we have to reduce the impervious area by 10% in the city.
Okay.
So these last few years, we've been doing the planning and design for those projects to get those off the ground. We have to meet the requirements by 2024, at 10% reduction in impervious by 2024. So this year, we're actually starting the construction of those projects with the Back Creek projects, Timber Creek and Ambridge. So that's why that's a long answer for why the fee needs to increase is to cover the construction costs. We've been building up a balance, but we need to continue to increase the funding for those construction projects. They're very, very expensive projects.
Okay, thank you, David. Appreciate it.
Other questions? Lynn Farrow, I saw you shaking your head very vigorously earlier. Anything you'd like to add? I don't know that we've ever heard from you. So if you do, fine. If you don't, that's fine too.
Lynn was the one that helped get the departments to make their fee changes and stuff, so she probably has more knowledge on that than I do.
No, I agree with everything Jody said. I don't think she missed anything, but yeah, I helped to put it together. So if you have any specific questions, I can pretty much answer them, I think. But Jody covered everything.
All right, I appreciate that. But I think that what I'm hearing is that this year, as in the past few years, every department is asked to take a look at the fees that relate to its departmental activities to ensure that they are fair and reasonable and will recapture the cost of the particular activity. And if they're not, to recommend changes and adjustments to those fees so that the revenue covers the cost. Fair enough?
Yes. And so that's the one thing about fees is that they're only allowed to charge as much as it costs to cover the cost of providing the service. And if you know, the Board of Appeals changes were the most relevant, I believe.
Yeah, Board of Building Appeals.
Board of Building Appeals, I'm sorry, Board of Building Appeals, yes.
A lot of appeals now are going directly to the Board of Building Appeals as opposed to the Board of Appeals, which is now seemed to be more of just purely a zoning Board of Appeals as opposed to a regulatory Board of Appeals.
Sorry about that. So, yes, that's correct.
Yep. Okay. Other questions or comments? Yes, Jim, I'm sorry, I missed your yellow hand there. Go ahead.
Thanks, that's okay. One of the questions that was just touched on briefly about 5 minutes ago was the solid waste increase of like 9%. What's the driver behind that?
Yeah, Jim, so you'll remember back in about 2012, we contracted out the collection of solid waste. And so at that time, we got a very favorable cost for those collection services. In 2019, so it was a 7-year contract. In 2019, that was resolicited, and so we have a new contractor. And unfortunately, the cost is not quite as advantageous as it was. We were getting a real bargain with Bates, which was the previous contractor. So both the disposal cost, which is us taking it to the landfill, as well as the collection costs have increased over the years. And so that's reflecting that. We increased it, I think, by 5% last year. We had a large fund balance in that fund. So instead of increasing by the full amount to recover all the costs, we increased it enough so it would be a gradual transition back up to full cost. So this year's the same. We're still going to burn down some of the fund balance, but we need that percent increase. I don't know if you recall, but back in 2012, when we did the contracting out, the annual rate, the annual cost for trash service was $420. We got that down to $205 a couple of years ago when we still had Bates. So this pushes it back up to, I think, $300. It goes from, I think, $274 up to $300. So we're still significantly below what we were back in 2012 before the contracting out, but it's going to gradually increase till we get full cost recovery.
I think there's been a service change from 2012 to 21 with the collection days being cut from 2 to 1.
Yeah, there were a lot of changes. So for example, the bulk waste is collected every week instead of quarterly. The yard waste is collected, I think, more frequently. The trash is collected less frequently. Recycling, I think, is the same, once per week. So yeah, there's some that have increased service levels, some that mostly the trash collection. Because, we saw a trend with recycling that the second trash collection each week was much less than the first. So that indicated that, and plus we got recyclables, probably more information than you ever wanted, but you asked the wrong guy about this stuff. So, But but we were getting a lot of recyclables in that second day when that should have been placed in with the recycling bin. So that helps balance that. If we do them both with the same frequency, then you get the appropriate recyclables in the recyclable can.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
No, thank you very much. That was great. Thank you, David. Thank you.
Okay, staff, very good presentation. Really appreciate it. Let me ask, I don't remember, when is our report due to anybody? I know we've talked about it before, and the reason I'm asking the question is our next regular meeting is May 13th. And I'm wondering whether the FAC need to have another special meeting to talk about what we've heard today. If there's any follow-up information we want or need to get that and still be able to, put together a report and submit it in a timely manner. So that's, the first question was, when do we really need to get a report to somebody?
I'll answer part of that, and that the 13th is too late for, I think, for the report. Am I right about that, Alderman Arnett? You were going to talk about when the Finance Committee is putting together their report, but there's our May meeting, and I don't have my calendar up in front of me. The first meeting in May is when the Finance Committee has to have theirs ready, and I think that's the same timing for yours. And I think at the
That's
last
correct.
meeting, we talked about how the 13th, your meeting on the 13th would be too late to pull something together for the deadline. And I don't remember the date of the meeting in May.
This is
but
Katie.
May 10th is
It's
the
the 10th.
council meeting.
It's after the council meeting. So if you're going to meet to pull together some kind of report or letter, it'll need to be between now and then.
Okay, that's what I kind of thought. So first, let me ask the FAC members, is there any other information that you feel you would like to receive from staff? I've given you all of the documentation that I have received from staff. You saw some of it today. The two other main pieces are the actual budget book for the operating budget and the capital budget. So is there any other type of documentation or follow-up you FAC members would like to receive from staff before we talk about what we're going to say to the city council? Bob Burden.
Fred, I think that this has been a very thorough presentation, and I really appreciate all the information that was gotten out to us via email ahead of time. So I feel very comfortable with what we received so far to be able to begin a discussion as to what our recommendation would be at an appropriate time when you decide that we should start that discussion. I don't think we need, at least from my perspective, I don't need any more materials than what we have.
Great. Faye?
I'm going to add and echo what Bob just said. From being on the FAC for a period of time, we've had enough information in advance, and it's adequate what we've received, in my opinion, as well.
Okay, thank you, Faye.
Information needed.
Yeah, and again, remember, we're dealing at the 20,000 foot level. We're not dealing down in the weeds. And I know I can't attend the meeting of the Finance Committee. If anybody else is available and want to attend, you're certainly welcome to do so. My suggestion, because we don't have a lot of time here, I don't think that our report is going to be as lengthy and complicated as it has been in other years when the budget presented real challenges. But my suggestion is that we get together next Thursday, and I'm not even sure it's going to be a lengthy meeting, but if we're looking at May 6th, I don't think that gives enough time for us to talk, discuss, deliberate, and then get a report prepared and approved before May 10th. That's why I'm thinking April 29th, and then that will give us time on the 29th to discuss, deliberate, get the essentially the key point for a letter. And then a letter can be prepared over the next few days, circulated, and hopefully approved in a timely manner. So does next Thursday present a major problem for any of the FAC members? No, then
As far as this is Frank. As far as my schedule is concerned, I should be available next Thursday.
good. I didn't see any FAC members raise their hand saying that was a problem. So Kim, can you arrange for another special meeting of the FAC, 8 a.m. Next Thursday, the 29th? That'll be greatly appreciated. All right, again, to Jody and to David, very thorough, comprehensive presentation, good information, and truly thank you. I think it's the best one that I've received in all the years I've been doing this, starting with the Blue Ribbon Commission, through, and now the FAC, for a good number of years. So congratulations. Yes, Bob.
David, will you be sending out an email to the FAC members for the 27th meeting that starts at 10 o'clock?
Yes, yeah, we will.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that way, if anybody is able to attend that, you'll have the information from that work session be able to share with us at our meeting on the 29th. Okay, anything else for the good of the order from FAC members or from staff? If not, thank you all very,